Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our special TEPSA Presents episodes. I am Todd Nesloni. I'm the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. We are thrilled throughout these challenging times to be able to bring you different experts and leaders across the nation to share great quality content. I am so excited to welcome my special guest tonight, Dr. Sean Durham, on with me. Dr. Durham, tell everybody kind of who you are.
Well, I'm very happy to be with you, and I'll start out by saying to all of my educational colleagues out there, a great big thank you. I know that you have risen to so many challenges lately, and I know that hopefully you're beginning now to see summer months here on the outset of your time, and you'll be able to get refreshed and be ready for the fall. But I am an associate professor of early childhood education at Auburn University. But prior to that, I have worked as a school teacher, a school administrator, and then actually got really fascinated in the science of early learning back as a principal one day when my school board said, we're going to put this child care program under your administration. I just really became fascinated with the science of how children learn, the things that promote children's learning, and the things that hinder children's learning and development. And so I've been talking about that with pre-service teachers now at Auburn for about 8 years. Prior to that, I directed a lab school, and I'm just very happy about some of the conversations that are going on right now in our nation about the importance of children's play and how we might have an opportunity, even with the horrors of this pandemic, to sort of hit a reset button on childhood and some of the things that makes childhood very, very, very important and play very important in the lives of children. So thank you, Todd, for the invitation.
Well, I know over here at TEPSA, we recently read the article that we're mentioning, and it really resonated with us, which is why we wanted to have this conversation here today. This article is also linked in this post that we're broadcasting from right now. So give everybody a little overview of kind of what that article dove into, and then we'll talk about some of it after you kind of share where that came from.
Well, this came from a very personal place in that as an educator, our semester was interrupted as well. We saw everything come to a screeching halt. And having been an advocate for children's play for a number of years through our summer enrichment program, I'm a very strong believer in that the fact that children do their best learning when they are able to direct it themselves. Mm-hmm. And so when the shutdown of the schools happened and the virus closed the schools, all of a sudden I started noticing this tide of anxiety begin to build amongst teachers and amongst parents. How are my children going to learn? Are they going to fall behind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All of this real stress and anxiety about that. And I thought, you know what? Now is the time to say something, to reassure parents, to reassure educators that children are not going to fall behind if they have an opportunity to direct their own education and direct their own learning. You know, I teach this in my courses, but Piaget taught us that interest is the fuel that drives the construction of knowledge. It drives the learning process. And so this was an opportunity for children to find new ways to connect with interests like they never have before. So I partnered with a wonderful author, Dr. Peter Gray from Boston College. I was a very strong supporter of his work for many years. And we were happy to put this article out that really just said, let's calm down. Let's see all the wonderful things that happen when children are allowed to play. They're going to learn.
Yep. Well, and you know, I love so much of the work that you're doing, and I encourage people after this to go and read the article. And as Dr. Durham and I chat today, if there are any questions that those of you who are watching would love to ask, please put those in the comments. We would love to address those questions as they come in too. But Dr. Durham, I'd like to kind of start with just the idea. I really want to define the word play, because I think sometimes when we hear certain words that we've heard all of our lives, we already have a preconceived notion of what's the conversation's about. But if you were to define the word play, how would you define it?
Well, a lot of times I use a phrase, self-directed activity, as a proxy for the word play for the very reasons that you mentioned. Sometimes play in many people's minds, it just means goofing off. Well, generally, it's a lot deeper than that. Generally, people are very engaged when they play, engaged mentally, physically, often socially involved, emotionally in their play. And so I like to refer to play as any activity that a person does for the pleasure of it, for the sake of it, because it's a passion or an interest to them. So it doesn't just mean mindless activity. Oftentimes, play is when the brain lights up the most because you have true engagement, you have true interest, and children are problem solving. They're trying to figure out, if it's a game, how to win. If they're building, they're trying to figure out how to get that building. They're trying to get that representation of what's going on here out into the manifested world. And so I think self-directed activity is a really good way of thinking about or defining play. Right. And this is a great catalyst for learning opportunities, both in the classroom and outside the classroom.
Well, as we talk about this, I feel like there's so many of us in education who truly understand the value of play, and we understand the importance of it in the educational system. But sometimes we're working underneath certain parameters or in certain environments where the people who truly are making the decisions are like, show me the research. Where's the research that is actually going to benefit our students? What have you seen in the research about play?
Well, the sad fact is the research has been around for decades, that children learn best through play. The National Association for the Education of Young Children, through their position statements on developmentally appropriate practice, teach that play should be an integral part of the education of young children because of its benefits to the physical body, also the benefits to the social emotional development of children, but also because of the intellectual stimulation that it provides. Recently, we've begun to understand that everyone who's listening to me will probably know what this term is going to mean, because it's been a hot topic in education. Executive functioning. Mm-hmm. The ability to control your impulses, make decisions about what you do, regulating your own behavior. That is seen to be and appears to be even more important to children than what they might learn short-term in a classroom. And executive functioning skills are closely linked to opportunities for children to play and guide their own learning. One of the things that I was just thinking about earlier today has to do with the position statements that have been put out for probably for the last 10 or 12 years. The American Academy of Pediatrics has put out position statements on the importance of play in the lives, the development, and the learning of young children. Now, we're in a phase right now where we're listening carefully to the advice of medical professionals about how we should do school. I think we have to go back and read those reports from the Academy of Pediatrics and take the lesson and incorporate play back into our schools with as much fervor as we are with the other types of recommendations we're getting from our medical professionals today.
Well, something that keeps coming to my head, though, is, as an administrator myself, and, our audience here at TEPSA is primarily administrators too, our thoughts are always on okay, this sounds great. I love the idea of play, but I'm concerned that it's going to impact the educational environment, or that they're not going to get all the standards, or they're not going to be prepared for the exam. And so for people who may be having that kind of juxtaposition of, this sounds good, but how do I not lose the content? Where do you tell them is the connecting piece that shows that play actually increases their academic knowledge?
Well, that's the very truth. I mean, you've made an excellent point. When children are allowed opportunity to play, we're living in a world now where children may, in many schools, have 15 minutes of recess. I was very happy to read about school districts in Texas when they expanded recess. They saw a lot of problems in the classroom decrease. I was very happy to read that. Well, play, and a child who's engaged in play and is able to have that intellectual autonomy and freedom will be much more cooperative when it's time, even when the teacher has the most direct instruction lesson that they want to provide, that'll go over a lot easier if they've had that opportunity to play. And we're not just talking about like a brain break.
Right.
We're talking about play that's actually stimulating the brain. But when they have that opportunity to play, then you're going to get much more out of your teaching. The other thing I'll say about that is that we're very fortunate in these days to have more and more child assessments that are sensitive to how children actually learn. So there are a number of assessments on the market today that are more holistic. They look at the developmental progress of children, things like their social emotional well-being that's so critically important, but they also track how children are doing in the academic disciplines. So broader assessments can give us the data that we need about the well-being and the progress that children are making.
Well, and there's something we've talked about too, you and I, about, that act of play is them working out their thoughts, their feelings, their relationships. And, so often in education, the first thing we turn to when we're thinking of a discipline situation is taking away recess or taking them out of the environment they're in and putting them by themselves. And that actually sounds to me like you're saying, that doesn't actually help them solve any issues. And it's not the idea of, there's no consequences. Like, we're not talking about that. What we're talking about here is that when children are allowed the opportunity to play, and we're talking about all ages here, like that really helps them learn how to interact with their environment, their peers, and work through solutions in their head, right?
Yes, and every teacher will identify with what I'm about to say. How many times have I visited schools and the children that are sitting along the fence during recess are probably the ones that need recess the most?
Yep.
And so that really doesn't make logical sense to me a lot of times because of that very fact. Yeah. But absolutely, the opportunities to play are those things which will engage children and they will allow them to make connections. First and foremost, we as teachers, the more information that we have about children, about what makes them tick, about what they are thinking about, the greater opportunities we have to marry our curriculum to their interests and make our learning most effective.
Well, and I remember an article that I read a few years ago that really stuck out to me as an administrator that talked about just the physical side of play as well, just the act of flipping over a bar or swinging, like the things that does to your brain to help it develop too, that when our kids aren't ever having those moments to be physically active, we're actually stunting their growth in many ways. It's going to cause many issues as they get older and older down the line.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And the issue with that is our first ethical responsibility as educators is to do no harm.
Right.
Well, that's potential harm when we're withdrawing those opportunities from children. But one of the things that really saddens me the most is we fail to see the genius of children when they are figuring out how to do something on their own. I was at a child care center not too long ago, maybe 2.5, 3 months ago, just before the shutdown. And there was a little boy there, and he was digging in the mulch on the playground. And he found a grub worm. And this was a child that was not one of the more socially connected children in the classroom. He had slight language delays, but when he found that, he was so excited he wanted to tell everyone, and 4 or 5 other children came and gathered around him. And they began to talk about how to build this worm, as they called it, build it a house. Then they talked about how could we get him to climb on the stick. Right. And so all of this thinking and planning and language and conversation was taking place. Why? Because it was a self-directed moment and a moment of enchantment for one child that spread. And soon I was standing there with about 6 or 7 children in a perfect learning and teaching setting that had been brought about, created solely by the allowance of that child to pursue something that was interesting to him.
And I love so much that example because, I think it's that reminder that when a kid finds the magic on their own sometimes through that self-directed learning, through that play, that's where it like makes a whole different world of difference than if the teacher had just brought out a grub and said, hey, look what I have here. What do y'all think we can do? Like, no, this kid discovered it on his own. He was so excited. The other kids came in because they saw the natural excitement from this one student. And like you said, there were so many other elements of language and relationships and thinking and creativity that's where play really begins to become something more than just a frivolous activity, but it's actually impacting that child in so many ways that you can't always judge on a test every day. And so, but I want to kind of shift that into the idea of, as we are now, many schools are wrapping up their year or they're already done and we're moving into the summer months. How can parents or educators still continue to encourage play, meaningful play during the summer?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's the key. I really do. I think it is the key. I'm alarmed with concerns and statements that are being made from educators about we really have to be diligent because there's this summer slide coming. Mm-hmm. Well, my colleague Peter Gray says, if children are going to forget something that they learned so quickly, did they really learn it at all?
Right.
And actually, some of the research has indicated, like perhaps consider math. Some of the computational skills do decrease a little bit in the summertime, but actually mathematical reasoning increases over the summer for children who have been studied. Why? Because they're using those concepts as they're planning, as they're thinking, as they're talking about how they're going to do things in the course of their play. So I think the first thing is relax and let children set the tone for their play, provide a rich and safe environment for them to play. Outdoors are key and critical. We want to take advantage of the outdoors, and there are so many wonderful outdoor educational movements going on across the world, actually. And so I would step back a little bit, relax, and just observe what children are doing in their natural habitat. Provide loose parts and materials, collections of things, good old-fashioned blocks, playing out in the yard with dirt and water and mud and all of those great things. I would encourage you to think back to your own childhood. How did you enjoy play? It's been so interesting to read the research about adults' play memories and how frequently people harken back to things primarily that they did outdoors. So let's give children that freedom again. Let's have the nerve to actually provide a selection of books and let them decide what they might want to read about or ask questions about or access technology about. So I really think that children will lead us if we'll step back and let them lead us. And I would also say this too. We need to, as adults, make sure that we're doing our own share of play. Yes. Do some things, fiddling around with some loose parts or materials, or going out in the yard and doing something that you enjoy. I think when we do more of that, and we're, as you said, in prime time to do that, as we're doing that, I think we can make connections to how meaningful those experiences are to us. And then think about, boy, how meaningful would that be in the life and the mind and the development of a child?
What I love that you just shared there were two things. One, and Janice Perrin over in the comments said to be a watcher. And I think that's so important for us as adults to stop trying to control it all the time and to make it end up a certain way. But sometimes just watch and let them lead and let them play. But I also love that you said, as an adult, don't forget to get out there and play too. Because, I've always said, I think adults are just big kids. And so but we've forgotten sometimes that childlike wonder within ourselves. And so I love that you also provided that kind of encouragement as well. And I also want to shout out to Nicole Beasley in the comments, who said her quote today is, "Nothing grows without rain." And the same can be said for kids in their natural play. And I couldn't agree more. Well, Dr. Durham, I want to ask this question though. as we begin to wrap up, and that is, when I think of play, I know that there is play that you can do alone. But there's also a lot of play that exists within social interaction. But we're in these weird, unprecedented times where social interaction isn't always encouraged because of some safety concerns. And I know as schools begin to go back in the fall, some of the environments may look different than they had in the past. What are some ways that we can still continue to encourage play, even if there needs to be some social distancing elements?
Yeah, one of the practices that I've been inspired by in the last few years is known as pedagogical documentation. And so this is when a teacher or an adult does that stepping back, as your viewer mentioned, and we may take a photograph of a child in play. We may write down some of the things that they say. We may keep it in a journal or a book, or we may create a display on the wall of the classroom that just lets children know that we're noticing, and remarks about some of the things that they're saying and the connections that they're making as they're thinking about what they're doing. I think documentation is one way that we can share what children are doing with other children, and that can inspire them in their own play. They can pick up where another child has left off. So even if space has distanced children, I think there are ways that we can show off what children are doing through their play that will inspire other children as well. We have to take the advice of the medical professionals, but I think that children especially, of course, as we know, these are periods of critical development for young children. So we have to weigh the advice on social distance. We have to weigh that against the long-term well-being of children as well, and understand that they really do need to play together in as risk-free situations as possible. But we've got to get them together. We've got to get them talking. We've got to get them enjoying life together, because it's a critical part of their development. There's a lot of recommendations and things floating around that we may not know the impact, but there's one thing that we do know from developmental science. Children who are deprived of play will suffer because of it. So we need to take it seriously. It's not all a fun and games type of situation. Children's play is critical to their well-being, not just in childhood, but throughout their life. Who they're going to be as an adult is related directly to the early experience that they have as a child, and that must include healthy doses of play.
That's some powerful moments there that I really hope people heard of how instrumental play is into who the adult becomes, and how you and I talked too about our job as educators is do no harm, just like in the medical profession, and when we keep kids from play, we're doing them harm, even inadvertently. But I also want to reiterate another point you said there about, even if the social distancing right now is keeping your child from playing with someone else, I loved the idea that you shared of taking photos or videos and sharing those with other kids and encouraging them to emulate it or to continue it or to push it further to the next step. Because even though they can't play right next to each other, there's still some creative ways that we can allow them to play together and still have some of the safeties and recommendations in place. So Dr. Durham, as we end today, I'd love to know, for everybody listening or watching today, what's the big thing you want them to walk away with on the importance of play?
I really think a theme of our conversation has been step back as adults. Step back, relax, and be amazed at the marvelous things that children will do when we let them be children. So, the request, I saw a friend of mine, this was on Facebook, and they said that their child had requested to take their training wheels off. And they had only started riding the bike, a few weeks. But they were able to do that because they sensed that they were ready to do that. Yeah. I think listening to children, they play what they think about, observing that play, and then accentuating, plugging in additional resources, or maybe having a conversation to wrap up about some of the things that may be on their mind. I guess the most important thing is we want to teach. We're really itching to teach. Mm-hmm. but sometimes we can derail their thinking. So I think as adults, we must step back, observe the magic that happens when children play, and then celebrate that. Celebrate that with others. We are in the midst of a time when we really have an opportunity to go back to what childhood was perhaps 60 years ago, when children would go out into the neighborhood and be gone, most of the day, and get friends together for a pickup game of baseball in the vacant lot next door. So many wonderful opportunities to observe and to notice and to really engage. All of us, if we ask ourselves the question, what do we know the most about? I would guarantee you that it's probably about something we were deeply interested in, whether it's sports or fishing, or maybe it's novels, whatever it might be. The thing that you know the most about, you probably gained that knowledge because of a deep interest. We must afford the opportunity to children to delve in deeply to their deep interests. So let's keep
I love that. That could not be a better way to end this conversation, Dr. Durham. And I have a challenge for everybody who's listening today. I would love for you to share out on social media using the hashtag #WeLeadTexas, just like you see at the bottom, of a way that your kids are playing during this time, whether that's your students or your own children. Because I think the more we can advertise the way our kids are playing, the more ideas we will end up with. So share out on social media using the hashtag #WeLeadTexas, tag TEPSA in your post. We'd love to see some way that play is happening all across our country and world today. Dr. Durham, for everybody over here at TEPSA, we really appreciate you and the work that you're doing. So thank you for spending a few minutes with us this evening.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thank you everybody else for listening or watching. From everybody here at TEPSA, we wish you all a great afternoon.